just explain a little bit in the first half of this session about some research that we've been looking at and some of the insights that we've uncovered. And then I'll be delighted to bring to the stage our incredible panel who will be helping us explore this in more detail. We have bullied and cajoled and blackmailed industry leaders to come and share their expertise. So very much looking forward to that conversation. First, quick introduction. I'm Stuart Bowden. I look after the strategy and the product teams at Wavemaker.
And I'm Zoe Bowen-Jones. I look after insights in Wavemaker's global team.
Excellent. So what is midlife myopia? Well, it's a problem that we shouldn't really have. I mean, we should not have any issue at all understanding the interests, the passions, the desires, and the thinking of Generation X. For one kind of extremely good reason. The majority of people here enjoying this lovely, warm and slightly windy day come from what I'm going to call the greatest generation, in my unbiased opinion. But nevertheless, it is true that even whilst we are members of that generation, sometimes it's quite hard for us to really understand from a consumer perspective what motivates them, what drives them. And particularly when it comes to social, what is it that they need from this platform, which they're obviously the future growth in platforms is driven almost entirely by Generation X and older audiences joining. There are no more Gen Zs left to join TikTok. All of their future growth is going to have to come from this, and I look forward to their analyst reports and their forward business planning as they start to tell those stories. But nevertheless, there is a gap. And it's a gap that I'm going to suggest we should care quite intently about as an industry that prides itself on being numerically orientated, business-minded. We should not be ignorant of the fact that Gen Z already has about 30% of the entire disposable wealth in the world. Most millennials and Gen Z languishing on 6%. But if you read financial pages regularly, as I'm sure we all do, you'll be braced for the incoming generational wealth transfer. That 52% of wealth owned by boomers is over the next 10 years going to entirely move into the hands of Gen Z. We'll have an unprecedented concentration of wealth, not only unevenly divided socially, but massively unevenly divided generationally. So Gen X will become by far the most wealth-carrying single generation in history over the next few years. But for some reason, we don't, as an industry, spend a great deal of time going into this in perhaps the detail that we should. Even if just a quick look on Walk, for example, suggests that you can get any number of research studies that you want in marketing for millennials, an awful lot for Gen Z. But you'll have to search quite a long time to find any insights as to how Gen X behave with media, how they choose, how they think. And that seems slightly odd, but it's not just an industry problem for advertising. We spoke to the Oxford Internet Institute. They've got almost no research at all on midlife users of the internet. You can get all the research you like on how people over 70 or over 65. Okay, I'm getting a top tip. Thank you very much. Right, I'm just going to go back to the start. No, I'm going to do that. Yes, but no research again on social policy and social thinking for this age group. But we're going to put that right now. Zoe's done an awful lot of work, and we're going to fill that knowledge gap. And it isn't just the industry and academia which misses this. The platforms themselves have a problem with it. Algorithms have a blind spot problem. We did some work across Europe and in the US, pulling images from Google and from Bing, hundreds of thousands of images of individuals when we searched for job titles. We thought it would be quite interesting to show what came back. And we ran some computer vision work on those hundreds of thousand images, try and categorize the age range of what the images were showing us. And then we compared that distribution age range with the real distribution age range of people who did those jobs in real life, in real classrooms, in real police stations. And it really slightly alarmingly, representation is incredibly inaccurately represented inside the algorithm, inside the training data. So 30% of representation just vanishes when we look at the internet and ask it what it thinks these jobs look like, 27% for teachers. So we're seeing less and less of these audiences in our everyday life and less in our research and in our conversations. Although, ironically, the only industry where the internet thinks everybody's younger than they actually are is advertising. So that's, I don't know if that's good news or not, but that's how it is. It's still a Gen X business, baby. And finally, it's a problem in the data, and it's a problem in culture. And I don't want to downplay the issue as only an advertising issue. There's very, very poor representation of people over 45 or 50 in dramas, in news programming, very, very poor representation of women in serious roles past that age range. So we want to explore a little bit more about how that shows up when it comes to social, because it does show up in social as well, not just in the content that's on social, but in the way that we invest in social. So 28% of TikTok's total users are already Gen X, but only 5% of global influencer spend follows that audience. And we think that talks to the heart of the problem, really. If we're not seeing it, if we can't account for it, if we don't understand it, then we'll never be able to put our clients' budgets and our collective creative attention to solving this issue in a way that's appropriate.
Yeah, and so because there's this investment gap and because so few creator campaigns are targeted at Gen X, when we do this kind of work, we have a kind of inherently Gen Z mentality, and we end up with lots of content that looks like this, kind of overtly Gen Z in imagery. Now that, by the way, is not a slight on any of this content, but I think it really highlights that audience blind spot that we've got here. The reality is that, you know, as an industry, we don't really understand how to do a good Gen X social strategy. And that blind spot with Gen X is really exposed when we look at the campaign results. So as part of this research, we tested a number of creator campaigns among a Gen X audience and compared them to Gen Z and millennial results. And what you can see here is that results were much worse among Gen X. And that's even true when the campaigns were actually targeted at the Gen X audiences. So they don't stick around as long, they're less likely to interact, and their opinions on the brands that are advertised are less influenced. Now, we think this might give us a clue as to what might work a little bit better with a Gen X audience. So we looked at the language that Gen X use on social media compared with Gen Z. And so what you can see is whereas Gen Z use lots more kind of salesy and direct language, things like shop and link, for Gen Z it's kind of a softer approach. So you can see words in there like improve and achieve, which point to a more long-term sort of relationship-building way of talking, which I guess focus on personal goals. And even the word visit, which you can see there, is less direct than kind of shopping. It's less kind of directly linked to the purchase. Now, before I get too deep into this, I want to make a little confession, which is that I am 31. I fall slap bang in the middle of the millennial generation. So if you subscribe to the stereotypes, that means I'm lazy, underprepared, and lack aspirations. So I think you'll understand why I'm a bit nervous about telling an audience with a strong Gen X contingent, including many of my bosses, how they should be speaking to Gen X. So thankfully, I've got lots of brilliant research to fall back on, rather than just telling you what I think. So from left to right, we have Talk DigiFaces. We conducted a qualitative study through which we spoke to 60 Gen Xers about their relationship with social media. We questioned audience origin. So to contextualize the qual findings, we looked at our global quantitative survey data. We tested on device. So we commissioned an aptly named research agency, On Device Research. We tested a series of creator campaigns. And through that, we were able to not just get kind of traditional survey results, but also behavioral data from their devices. We analysed GOAT tech, and we've got Arron from GOAT on the panel later. And through that, we were able to look at Gen X influencers and try and understand how they communicate compared with other generations. And finally, we contextualise momentum. So hopefully, many of you will be familiar with our purchase journey database. And we took a cross-generational approach to that, and so looked at how the purchase journey is for Gen X is kind of both different and similar to other generations. We also watched hours of creator content and checked the little academic research that is out there. Now, one of the first things that came out of that research is that Gen X are far from being the technophobes that we often paint them out to be. So they're just as confident in using new technology as Gen Z are. And when it comes to TikTok, while the reach figures are still slightly lower, they're the fastest growing generation on the platform, and they're flocking there in their millions. Now, this might seem like an obvious point, but because of the blind spot we have with Gen X, it means that sometimes we do kind of lump them in with boomers and paint them to be sort of elderly, which you know as well as me, that's not the case. When it comes to how they use social media, it's much less about boredom relief for Gen X than it is for other generations. So whereas you might find a Gen X trying to pass time by scrolling through at the bus stop, maybe even walking down the stairs, for Gen X, it's much more deliberate and tends to be scheduled. So you can see from this quote that from one of our respondents that for them, social media has kind of become like a habit. So he likens it to reading the paper or maybe having a tea in the morning. It serves as kind of uninterrupted time to themselves where they can do things like catch up with the news or find funny videos to watch or connect with their loved ones. And it's really that desire for connection that brings them onto the platform. That's the number one reason they use social. And it's not that this isn't the case across other generations, but it's particularly important for them to connect with people they know. So whereas Gen Z and millennials might cast the net a bit wider, they tend to stick to their communities and their sort of real life connections. Now, this slide is dedicated to Pam, who's given a big cheer. So Pam from Paramount will be on our panel shortly. And I'm very excited that Paramount are bringing back the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in August. So for me, this is very nostalgic. It really reminds me of watching Saturday morning TV with my brother when I was younger. And I'm not saying, obviously, that nostalgia is exclusive to the Gen X audience. I've told you I'm a millennial, you know it's not. But it was a big theme in our research, and I think what's interesting is that mostly the time for which this audience is nostalgic predates social media. So it's interesting then that it's social which is facilitating things like catching up with school friends or, sharing old photos and memories. So we know that nostalgia and connection can bring them on platform and that they're more scheduled in the way that they use social. But what does a good strategy for Gen X look like? So this is first of 5 tips that I'm going to whiz through to try and answer that question. So the first is that social almost acts like a village rather than a city. And brands are going to have to work really hard to find and earn their place within that village. What do I mean by that village analogy, you might be asking? So essentially, Gen X seek familiarity, whereas Gen Z, as I said, maybe cast the net a bit further. They almost bring their real lives onto social. So we talked about kind of connecting with their loved ones. Maybe lots of them talked about serving their local community or joining interest groups based on their existing hobbies. So you can see this woman has many, many interests, from plant-based cooking to activism and clubbing. Sounds like a legend. But I guess so the question for us then is whether there's a role for brands within this kind of close-knit village community. And the answer is yes. So social is one of the most popular ways for this audience to discover brands, and lots of them really excitedly shared examples of brands that they know they wouldn't have discovered had it not been for social media. But they really have to be worth discovering. And I think that was true where we looked at the campaign results. You know, if they don't think they're relevant, if they're not interested, they will scroll on. You're a ruthless generation, even if you are the best. And so for Gen X women specifically, beauty is the number one category with which they engage on social. Obviously, that's a massive opportunity, and it's one that I know L'Oréal recognise. So we've got Alexandra from L'Oréal, who's going to talk a bit more about their work in this space later. And one brilliant example is a partnership they did earlier this year, where they partnered with 10 influencers over 40 to promote their Age Perfect Rosy Oil Serum. It took me ages to remember that. And I think, the reason that campaign kind of makes L'Oréal and that product, I'm not going to say it again, a brand worth discovering is that they really thoughtfully went about how they address the age gap in the market and in the category. So they're up for discovering brands, but Gen X are not going to go all the way straight away. As the old saying goes, we need to woo them with ecosystem thinking instead. I will explain that. So the data tells us that Gen X are less promiscuous than Gen Z and millennial shoppers, at least when it comes to purchases. So they consider far fewer brands, which means for us, it's much more difficult to get them to consider our brand. And they're also less impulsive. So when it comes to purchase triggers, they're much more likely to be triggered by need. And that's something we observed across categories. So whether it's, I don't know, by replacing the shower gel or buying a new car because the old one's broken down, need is very important. And it's a big contrast to Gen Z and millennials, who are twice as likely to buy something for themselves as a treat, really living out the treat yourself mentality. But while they're much less likely to buy something on a whim, that doesn't mean that Gen X aren't prepared to go all the way. It just means that we need to woo them through ecosystem thinking. So because they're less impulsive, Gen X are more likely to go and look for kind of other parts of the ecosystem and research, whether it's on review sites or through the brand's websites, to really validate the purchase that they're making. So we saw lots of examples of people saying things like this, which is they acknowledge that social has very much changed the way that they shop, but they're not responding directly to the ads. They're going to check elsewhere, like where else is it available? How can I trust that this is the right brand for me? And a great example of a brand who woos successfully through ecosystem is Zwift. So Zwift is a client of ours, and our consultancy team have been working with them over the past year or so to make sure every aspect of their ecosystem is interconnected. So everything from their global sites to their retail partners is linked, and each of them has a really important role to play within the ecosystem. It kind of recognizes that social advertising, and particularly for Gen X, can work harder when it's linked with other touch points. And one of the reasons why ecosystem thinking is more effective is trust. And what we found through all of our different research studies was that trust is absolutely fundamental to the purchase journey for Gen X. So for brands who have already got trust, it's all about flaunting it. And if they don't, they're going to have to work hard to build it. So one of the things this comes down to is the distrust that they have in social platforms. So there were absolutely loads of examples of things like this, which is that brands or companies they find on social are kind of untrustworthy until proven otherwise. So that's one of the reasons that they'll go and do a little bit of research or ask friends themselves. And it's a problem for us because brand trust is particularly important for this audience. So they're much more likely to have it as an important buyer need than Gen Z and millennials. Now, obviously that's quite good news for established and well-trusted brands. Brands like Clinique or Boots, which are welcomed here, who can almost use social as a nudge to an audience who already knows and trusts them well. But if you're a less established brand, maybe it's slightly less obvious and easy to do this. But an effective way for brands to build trust can be to partner with trusted creators. And two really interesting examples which came out of our research are Dr. Rashad Ritchie and Trini Woodall. Now, these two are absolute polar opposites. So he is a US-based social justice activist who has hosting responsibilities across podcast, TV, and radio. And she, in my opinion, is a fabulous beauty guru who is the face of her own makeup brand. So he represents the very serious and important, and she represents the more kind of light-hearted and fizzy. But they're both brilliant examples of trusted creators, and I think that makes the point that there's no one-size-fits-all approach for this audience. I think Trini's a particularly good example because she has a backstory. So she made her name before the world of social media, and she now leverages the trust that she built through that to build her kind of makeup brand, and it's proven very successful. So we touched on creators there, and when it comes to creators, one of the main things which came out is that Gen X want to see people like them. Again, I think that feels really obvious, but it's important because I don't think it's always done, or it's not always done well. Because one of the things that brands need to do is think about how they're reflecting Gen X's real lives. Just for my own interest, who's heard of this word, homophily? Give me a show of hands. Okay, that's very reassuring because I hadn't heard it either until doing this research. So homophily is a sociological concept which says that we're drawn to people like us, which feels quite intuitive. And it was proven out through our research. So we found that Gen X were much more positive about content which featured Gen X creators than they were about content featuring Gen Z or millennials. It also felt more relevant, so they felt the brand was more relevant to them when they could see it being sort of shown off by a Gen Xer. And I think someone who really exemplifies this point is Claire Hall. She is a fab fashion influencer, a Gen Xer, and she also happens to be on our panel later. And I think Claire really articulates very well the importance of choosing the right Gen X influencer for this audience. So particularly in fashion, she talks about how influencers like her can bridge the gap between what's in store and how women of Gen X age can wear it. I have to say, she's got a fabulous outfit on, which you'll all see. But an important point to make on that is that Gen X don't only want to see themselves. One of the really nice things about reading the Quoll research was that they all talked about feeling younger than they are. They also, lots of them have kids or even grandkids, and they want to engage with this generation. And I think if you even look to TikTok and the success of multi-generational content, you can see that that's appealing to anyone, regardless of your age. One of the things we said at the start is that for Gen X, the time they spend on social is much more scheduled and deliberate. And what that means is that when the content's right, they're much happier to spend longer with it. They're there for it. They're here for a long time, not just a good time. And so it's worthwhile for brands to plan for a lasting relationship with them. So we saw that Gen X creator posts perform better among Gen X. And when we looked at what those posts, what kind of characterizes those posts, we found something really interesting, which is that they are on average 75% longer. Now, you might be thinking that this is skewed by the fact that Gen Z are more likely to post on TikTok, which favors shorter content, but we have accounted for that. And so what this means is that for brands wanting to work with Gen X, it really pays off to build a lasting relationship with a great brand ambassador, because that brand ambassador can then build a lasting relationship with their Gen X audience. A brand I think has done this really well is M&S, who have employed Fred Sirix, who is a famous maitre d', as their resident wine expert. I think this is a really good example because the kind of link between the two brands is really clear, and it leaves lots of potential for kind of long-term, future creative content.
Would you watch a 10-minute TikTok?
No.
Sorry, that shouldn't have sound, so I apologise. I don't know whether you were able to mute it. Yeah, fab. So apparently Paris Hilton is in Cannes. I've scanned the audience, though. I unfortunately can't see her, which is a shame because her recent 10-minute viral TikTok ticks every one of the boxes, every one of the things that we've gone through today. So has anyone seen this? Familiar with this? Okay, a few people. So this went viral earlier this year, and it's basically a 10-minute TikTok she did for Hilton hotels, where there's lots of skits. It's very funny. It's very kind of aware. It's a bit of a commentary on social media advertising in itself. So how does she tick the boxes? We talked about finding and earning your place within their kind of close-knit community. And one of the ways to do that is by not being too salesy. So in sort of being a bit self-effacing, taking the mick out of that, they've kind of earned their place and they've got the attention of Gen X. Woo them with ecosystem thinking. I won't say that any more times. So right at the beginning of this video, there's a promise that if you get to the end of the 10 minutes, then you will be rewarded by things like loyalty points for Hilton, prizes, lots of things which exist outside of just Hilton's social media presence. Trust. We talked about trust. I mentioned Trini having a career pre-social media. The same is true for Paris. She's built trust over a couple of decades. Work with Gen X creators. Shockingly, Paris Hilton is 45. Perhaps she doesn't reflect any Gen X's real life, but she's Gen X. And then plan for a lasting relationship. So we talked about having a relevant long-term ambassador. And for her, obviously, it's in the family. It makes sense as a kind of long-term collaboration. So here's to lots more Paris content for Hilton hotels in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you, Zoe. Well done, Zoe. Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Zoe. Right, now we're going to hear from some real experts on the subject as well. Please come on up. Right, I'm delighted to be able to introduce the panel who spend the next half an hour just talking with us around some of the stuff we've seen earlier this morning from Zoe, but more importantly from their experience of working with content, working with influencers, working with partners to find the right kind of insights and the right techniques to make them as powerful as they can be for brands. So I'll just briefly introduce everyone now. To my left here, we have Alexandra Bolton, Global Head of Social and Content at L'Oréal. Been working on their influencer community strategy, including gaming and esports, an incredible experience in that area. Stop it. And then we have Pam Kaufman, CEO and President of International Markets at Paramount. If that wasn't enough, also looking after experiences, hotels, resorts, and the whole shebang. Very fascinated to see what Pam has to bring today. And then Claire Hall, who we saw on screen a moment ago. Thank you for joining us, fighting through the flight mayhem from London. Here to share experiences of building and sustaining and growing the community, Club 40 Claire, where a lot of fashion, a lot of influencer work around fashion and beauty. I was checking out the merch earlier. I was delighted to see there's also a Club 50, so I can still bag myself a hoodie kind of after this.
I am actually in Club 50 now.
You've future-proofed it. It's a bit like 20th Century Fox, isn't it? It's just kind of, and then we have Arron Sheperd, not only famous for his continual panel presence, I think we're the third or fourth today, or even his daily podcasts, which are an essential part of the Cannes experience, but for being the joint founder and current CEO of GOAT, the world's largest data-powered influencer business, and the latest addition to the WPP family. And Zoe, we have seen and heard from earlier this morning, alongside being one of our strategy directors, also the Campaign Female Frontier winner of 2023.
Wow.
Whoa. Right. Thank you. Just to jump into some conversation. We were hearing from Zoe about how the blind spot manifests and how we might address it. Be interested to know, Pam, if I could come to you first. Do you sense a blind spot in this area when you think about Paramount and how Paramount talks to its customers?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I agree with everything. Yes. Everything you said spoke to our company and our brand. So Paramount Global has some of the most widely recognized brands and characters in the world. And again, the flat-out answer is absolutely not. Paramount Pictures has been around 100 years. CBS is one of the biggest broadcasters in the world, by the way, with an average demo of between 50 and 65. Most of our content from CSI, NCIS, Blue Bloods, et cetera, caters to this audience. And in addition to, obviously, you mentioned Nickelodeon. We have the most unbelievable multi-generational characters from SpongeBob, the Teenage Mutant Turtles, Ren and Stimpy. I don't know if you saw, we're bringing back Zoe 101, iCarly. All of this really speaks to your answer. And so as a company, we are consistently talking to this audience. I think they love seeing themselves on television. They love the fact that they grew up on our content. And, you know, one show in particular is just been resonating in such a huge way, and that's, I don't know if anyone here watches Yellowstone. Thank you, a lot of nodding heads. Yellowstone, oh, look at that, we have a slide, there we go. Yellowstone was created about 5 years ago from Taylor Sheridan. It's really become not only one of the biggest TV shows in the world, it's on over 10 markets, it's now one of the biggest consumer products lifestyle brands, and it stars Kevin Costner, and then the spin-off, which is 1883, a singer named Tim McGraw, Faith Hill, all Gen Xers. 1923 features two people you might have heard of, Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren. So again, this is such an unbelievable, multi-generational cast and content, and that's what we're focused on.
Is there something about the storytelling or the way the show's put together that you think has a different rhythm or a different approach that might appeal to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to keep echoing what Zoe said. People, it's representation. That's really what it's all about, and I know many of my colleagues here are going to talk about that. You want to see yourself, no matter what generation you are, if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, etc. We all want to see ourselves represented, and this show has definitely struck a chord, not only in representation, but it's actually one of the most beautifully shot shows. It's a story of family, and of course I have a little sizzle to show you because it's also, listen, it's a really exciting moment for us. So
Let's
take a look at Yellowstone.
Can you click forward?
I'm going to move.
You're going to have to click forward twice, eh?
The Dutton family has captivated America.
There's a war going on in this valley.
And the world of Yellowstone is exploding everywhere.
So you want to be a cowboy, huh?
Yellowstone is the #1 entertainment property.
This is a very good show.
And with more content coming in 2023 and 2024, Yellowstone is the definition of a franchise.
With Yellowstone, I had built out this backstory of where the Dutton family came from. Okay, how do we reinvent the wheel again? What's the next thing we want to do?
They ain't ready.
We better get ready, because everybody in this town's gonna be looking for us.
This rugged Western world has become a consumer products powerhouse in every category.
Already over 600 are gone.
With a top-selling hat and mug at Walmart, the #1 selling brand on merch by Amazon, a #1 DTC site, and sold-out collaborations.
Anybody obsessed with Yellowstone?
Yellowstone is the #1 drama on TikTok, thanks to its dedicated fan base. And the Yellowstone universe has more on the way.
Paramount had the same vision that I did. They're recognizing that what we're creating is special, and they're giving us the resources to do it. And that's a great partner.
There's never been a better time for Yellowstone.
Very, very nice. So help me God, I'm going to get one of those denim jackets with the Yellowstone logo.
You know what? I know people. I can get you a discount. You got it. No problem.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. Rebounding on what you were saying, so L'Oréal is over 100 years old as well, 114 years old. And, you know, we create the beauty that moves the world. And I would say that the first thing when you came, you know, with this Gen X panel was that we want to cater beauty for all and beauty for each. So this absolutely encompasses Gen X. And when we look into our brands, you may know L'Oréal Paris because I'm worth it. This is a very feminine and feminist brand that celebrates women. And actually, you know, competition was really hard because Eva Longoria is speaking about women of worth. She's a Gen Xer. And she was at the Palais just earlier talking about her relationship with L'Oréal Paris and what we do to represent these women. We also have brands like Lancôme, who stand for happiness. And we have spokesperson, because our brand acknowledged how important Gen X is, that represent, you know, this whole generation. So Eva Longoria is one, Julia Roberts, Kate Blanchett, Viola Davis, and, you know, even the men out there. We have Nicolas Coster-Waldau. So we really look into this target and cater not only products, You may know Revitalift Laser, Lancome products, but also in the representation. And I think when it comes to, we were talking about social, when it comes about media, yes, we look at the target and advertise on the target, but more importantly, we've listened to what their needs are and what the insights are so that we have the relevant content. And so we look at the sociographics, and Gen X, we have quite a lot of insights here. And interestingly, on social, with our brands, we've managed to dominate TikTok, so there are some things that we do right when it comes to beauty influence. And it's also because we've targeted that Gen X generation, because we've understood their consumer needs. And I think we can do better in selecting the creators we work with so that we go even further in the representation of the generation. But we advertise those products, and our creators put forward these Gen X products as well.
I think it's so interesting the amount of work you put into influencer selection and making sure you really understand what's going on under the surface, understand their full personality and their reaction with their community, because it unlocks a lot of potential. Are there any tips or techniques, or is it just a matter of going deep into the people that you're considering and spending the time to understand them?
Well, definitely listening. I think regardless the channel, you've got to listen to the conversations, understand the tone, understand the needs.
Yeah.
And that's at the base of, and I know we'll come to it later, but community building and creating the relevant content. I mean, once you know what the conversations are about, you can reach out properly to that generation.
Great, thank you. And Arron, I know that finding fit for influencers, matching them to brands is at the heart really of the journey you've been on with Goat. It'd be great if you could share perhaps how you do that and any advice on how to go through a selection process that really works.
Sure, well I think great to be here as well. Please don't introduce me as current CEO. It always makes me very nervous. Something I'm not aware of. I think there's a big misconception around social usage and Gen X and this generation. And I think it primarily comes from how these platforms form, right? Even when Facebook formed, it was just for university students, right? So it started there. When we were selling Instagram 3-4 years ago, the common comment from the client was, oh, it's just for kids, right? Because they are first adopters. And now TikTok, lots of people think the same thing about that. Now, the reality is these platforms age up really, really quickly. And the whole spectrum of society is operating on social. The beauty of influencers fundamentally is that they segment their audiences themselves, right? By the content they put up. If you're a 55-year-old woman putting up content around what it's like to be a 55-year-old woman with all the daily sort of activities and issues and relationships and everything else that a 55-year-old woman is dealing with, it is highly likely your audience is going to be from that, right? And take away Gen X, right? Influence is all about niches fundamentally. So, you can go into all sorts of different verticals, and the same thing applies. It naturally segments the audience. So there's a big question of how do we get to these people? And I think the answer is definitely through influencers that have already segmented that audience. Claire has obviously done that exceptionally well, and we've worked with her historically. I think there's also a issue around the type of content that thrives versus what this generation wants. And as you saw from the research, consideration is a really key factor. So that longer form content, which isn't across every single platform, but is across quite a few of them, I think is more and more important. So longer form content around consideration, and then understanding that actually you have ready-made audiences, right? It's very unlikely that a 19-year-old guy is going to be, watching Claire's content. I'm not saying they won't be. There might be some, but she is going to have your target audience nailed down, right? So for us, influencers is niche content to niche audiences at scale, and that really is the beauty.
Yeah, I love the idea there's something kind of self-selecting in the fabric of social that means that you're able to create that connection to begin with and then put the effort into thinking about how you build the right content behind that relationship. And Claire, perhaps it's something that you could help give us some insight on about how do you generate understanding and insight about what your users need from you, what they appreciate finding from you?
I still believe, I know that the term influencing still has a bad name with my generation. We don't want to be overtly influenced. We want to be encouraged to explore words that Zoe said, visit sites, learn about products, understand whether certain fashion outfits are going to suit us or not. So it's more about educating, I think, for my audience, and therefore through that education and through sharing parts of my life and the experiences that I've had, generates that trust. So I'm not technically influencing in the kind of Gen Y, Gen Z sense, but I am sharing my life and the things that I enjoy using, the way that I enjoy wearing clothes, and also I'm a personal stylist too, so my knowledge about how to wear outfits, I've built that trust with my audience, so I don't feel that my audience think that I'm influencing them.
That's so interesting. So do you want to talk to that briefly?
No, I was just going to say, because I think we briefly touched on it in that presentation, but that came out so strongly when they were talking about social. It was just like, don't be like pushing stuff in my face, and like anything overtly salesy. You saw from the how long they spend with content. I'm just going to flick right past it, and I guess maybe because they're slightly less used to that. And
people will know if I'm not being authentic and genuine with the products that I'm sharing, my audience will absolutely know that.
Yeah.
So I have to maintain that credibility, and I have to be very careful with the brands that I work with.
Have you turned down brands?
Absolutely.
You have?
And I'm in a position now where I'm able to do that, but obviously influencers, content creators that are starting on their journey, they will accept any brand if they're getting paid for it, and it's not an authentic partnership. The due diligence hasn't been done by the agency. Maybe they've got X amount of followers, they tick a box, whether it's a diversity box or, but they really haven't looked into that influencer's audience, that influencer's movements and beliefs and ethos off-grid to ensure that the product is going to be well represented and well received.
And I just add to that, that we see exactly that from a data point of view. Like the second it's inauthentic, nothing flows through, right? So as soon as, like from a brand point of view, you should be really challenging the creators that you're working with, right? And people are too easy to select ambassadors. From our side, we're obviously working on data first, and then once we've decided that they are fit from a data point of view, we still need them to be a real advocate for the brand, right? So if we were going to work with someone, we'd speak to that influencer and say, hey, this is the brand, this is what we're thinking. If their reaction isn't, oh my God, I love that, we're going to go straight on to the next one. As soon as you try and crowbar something in, it's not going to work.
Yeah, I was going to rebound on that point, because when we talk about trust and authenticity, I mean, they're two big words. And I mean, I often ask myself the question, what does authentic mean? And in the end, there's the authenticity of the messages that the brand or the creators are conveying, and the fit. And when you don't have that fit, even if a creator or your advertising is trying to be authentic, but the editorial line doesn't match, you're not building the trust and you're not coming through as being authentic. And we're in a generation that's all about no nonsense, that they want the proof, they want the education. So the authenticity here goes both ways.
Brilliant point. Got time for one last question, I think. Pam, if I can come back to you. You and we're talking about authenticity in content and authenticity in marketing for that audience group. And I know you've got 2 Gen X blockbusters lined up for the rest of the year. When you think about marketing those to audiences who might be interested in Nicole Kidman or Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, and who wouldn't be interested in those? Are there any tips or techniques you think about when you're trying to engage with that audience?
Well, yes. I want to add one thing before I answer that. I love the conversations going on. I think just to add, in addition to the influencers, one of the things that I think is really important for our business and why people love partnering with us is it's different. So, I mean, obviously we have real life people, but we also have a lot of animated characters, and people want instant recognition. They want comfort. Right. Again, Zoe said trust, and so the partnerships that we are building around, whether it's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Mission Impossible or Yellowstone, they are absolutely helping brands get recognized and also feel like there's some trust built in. We did an unbelievable Lancome partnership You say it way better than I do, with Emily in Paris. And again, what an amazing partnership. It obviously was great for Emily in Paris, but I think it was great for Lancome to partner with such a young, exciting, cool show. So that's just, I wanted to comment on that. And that's why I love what we do. And the partnerships we form also have to be authentic. We, too, turn down, there's a lot of companies that want to partner that don't make sense. And so, anyway, I think it was just a great conversation. Stuart's teeing me up to show you a trailer. I swear I didn't just come with content, but, you know, we are content's king. And no, I mean, on a panel that's all about Gen X, we've got the Gen Xer, maybe baby boomer, Tom Cruise. We launched, the film premiere was Monday night for Mission Impossible 7 in Rome. It's going to be, he's going around the world like he does to launch the premiere. The movie opens up July 12th. And the reason why I brought it all seriousness is because it stars a 61-year-old action figure hero. And the reason why Top Gun was the biggest film of the year was two reasons. One, obviously, it was a great film. But two, audiences today want to see something that they are familiar with. It's really hard to break through. Yeah. And so this is a film that many millennials and Gen X's grew up on, and they want to share it with their family. Mission Impossible opens. Mark my words, it will be the biggest film of the year, and it could be the biggest film of all time. He shot 7 and 8 in one take, so 8's coming out next year, and you guys are in for a thrill ride. And again, I brought it because it stars a 61-year-old unbelievable human. So we'll close with that.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much to everyone on the panel for making the journey to be here. Thank you for everybody this afternoon.